I used to work as a security guard at the mall a few miles away from my house. I'm going to tell you about a case that made me quit. More than anything else, I want you all to help me with something. I want you to tell me what I should do. I'll explain the story and ask a more in depth question at the end. So, there was one night where I wasn't working and I was enjoying my day off. Nothing bad or weird happened to me that night, but when I went into work the next day, I found out that a man had been found dead in the downstairs of Old Navy. I learned his name, but out of respect, I'll call him Anthony. When the AM shift began, the workers were obviously horrified when they opened up the shop doors. In the middle of the floor was a man's body just laying there. They had to close the store for the entire day so no customers would find out. The strange part was that there was absolutely no evidence showing what exactly happened to him. Almost everything in the store seemed untouched, and there was nothing around him to indicate a possible weapon. They asked me to look through the security cameras to see what happened to him. And of course, it being my job as a security guard, I agreed. Big mistake. I opened up the security footage for Old Navy and rewinded it all the way back to the previous night at about 8 p.m. I didn't see anything for a while, but I sat and waited until I saw a man enter. At about 8:40, Anthony walked in. There were only a few people left in there because the mall would close in about 20 minutes. The store manager saw Anthony and told him this fact. Anthony agreed and told the manager that he had to just use the restroom and he'll be out. The manager understood and seemed to have pointed him to the direction of where the restrooms were. Anthony thanked the manager and clumsily waddled his way into the men's room, nervously clutching the area between his pants. When he went in, he never came out, or at least not anytime soon. I mean, I understand he's probably handling his business, but this was abnormally too long. It seemed as though all the workers inside forgot about him. Anthony seemed to have stayed in there far too long, and by then the store seemed to have closed. So I fast forwarded to the parts where he stepped out. I was a bit upset that the store maintenance didn't come in and check the bathrooms before closing, but I wasn't surprised. The cleaning staff in the mall has always been notoriously lazy and never do their jobs well. At that point, it was 9:20 p.m., and the store was completely closed. But when Anthony came out, the strangest part was he looked lost and confused. He also had a noticeably large bruise at the top of his head that was forming. It seemed fresh. Did he get into a fight? Did he slip and fall? I mean, these are common things, and it does happen every now and then, but given the circumstances, it just seemed too bizarre. Not even moments later, I could see Anthony running into the main section of the store, except when he only took a few steps in, he quickly halted himself. The store, as well as the rest of the mall, was, as mentioned, closed. This meant that all the lights were off and all the doors were closed and locked. Anthony could only see darkness and nothing else. He was locked in. For about a minute or two, the cameras automatically switched to night vision mode. So, I continued watching with ease. But Anthony did not have this luxury. He started feeling around the walls and squinting through the darkness to try to find some sort of light switch or flashlight he could use. Then, in that sudden moment, there was a sound of movement. The cameras aren't very good at picking up sound, but even I can hear it. I can see Anthony beginning to panic slightly as he frantically felt along the walls to find anything that could help. He eventually felt something sticking out of the wall. He didn't think twice before flicking it up. Thank God it was the light switch. Most of the lights in the store's main section turned on and gave Anthony sight again. The night vision on the camera settings nearly blinded me before switching back. Anthony was seen looking around the store. He was probably looking to see if there was any sort of person or animal that was making that sound or sneaking around. But there was no one. When he began walking around the store, surveying his surroundings, there were several large metal gates sealing all the front entrances shut. He looked around for any other possible way out, but everywhere he looked, he just saw clothing. There were shelves everywhere, absolutely filled with clothes. Clothes that were covering every single mannequin. I've never liked those goddamn mannequins. There must have been at least 20 of them at that moment. They looked like they were everywhere with the bodies positioned in every which way, looking in every direction with their lifeless faces and plastic bodies and accessories. I've always wondered why stores even started using them in the first place. Then, suddenly, a huge crash of thunder scared Anthony half to death. It was storming outside that night. Bad, too. There was a terrible thunderstorm for a few hours. I knew the store would probably lose power at any moment. He knew this too. So, that gave him enough motivation to start finding a way out, quick. He started walking over to the other end of the store looking for any other exits, but on his way over, just as I predicted, all the lights in the stores went out. They came back on again after a few seconds, but in that brief moment of pitch black darkness, I could barely make out the sound of something moving again. I could tell he was trying to brush it off as something else, but what bothered me was the fact that the cameras never turned off. If the power went off, the cameras would be disabled and would need to be rebooted, but they stayed fully functional. I couldn't make sense of it. Anthony walked all the way to the back of the store, but found a bunch of small offices, no exits. As he turned back around to go back to the main section of the store, the lights flickered off and on again. This time, they stayed off for slightly longer. I was hoping that at any moment the night vision would switch on so I could see what was happening, but the lights came on again soon. The camera stayed on yet again. This time, the store was different. Anthony walked back into the store's main section and stopped for a moment. He looked at all the mannequins in front of him. He could swear that at least 5 of them were turned towards him, and at least 2 of them were looking him dead in the eyes. I'm positive that they were not in those positions before, but he tried to pay no mind to them. I wouldn't either if I was in that situation. He walked towards the main help desk and started looking through the drawers. I could assume he was looking for some sort of key ring or something else to break out with. The lights went out again, but they came back up after only about 5 seconds. That's when Anthony was observed looking back out towards the store. He was looking at all the mannequins. Almost all of them were looking at him or facing him in some way. Their deadpanned, lifeless faces pierced his soul. I could sense this, and I was watching it in complete safety. Some of those mannequins had clearly moved a substantial amount. Some of their arms were in completely different positions, and their bodies were beginning to shape in a way that only a human body could. A few of them had completely moved off the panels they were initially displayed on, and they seemed to be moving towards Anthony. He began to breathe very quickly and nervously. He backed away from the desk and ran back down towards the narrow bathroom hallway. He probably thought it was a safer place. He forcefully pushed on the door, but it didn't budge. He tried pushing it again, but it didn't open. Poor Anthony. He didn't realize that the workers always lock all the doors in the workplace before leaving. He pounded the door so hard with his fist that, almost as if it was on cue, the lights went out. And this time, it felt like an eternity. I most definitely heard many footsteps moving around the store. I prayed that Anthony was moving around them and was escaping the store at this very moment. When the lights came back on, the cameras were still on, and Anthony stood in the same spot he was at when the lights went out. We were both terribly startled when we saw a large group of mannequins crowding the hallway directly in front of him. There were at least 10 of them. They were reaching out towards him like a bunch of zombies, but their faces still remained fixed in their default smile. Anthony quickly looked around for a space in the hallway. The mannequins were crowding him, and if he didn't move out of there right now, the mannequins would corner him. And, well, God knows what they'll do. The only way to avoid them was going back down the hallway and scooting out of the way of all the mannequins. In order to do that, Anthony would have to inch past each and every one of them. while praying to the heavens the lights didn't go out while he was there. So, that's just what he did. He quickly and carefully maneuvered his way around the huge pack of plastic people. And with every one he passed, I would pray as hard as I could that the lights would stay on. It's odd. I hadn't really felt this sort of feeling before, and I've never felt it since then. It was a sense of hoping and praying that he would get by each mannequin, even though I knew exactly how this whole situation would end. I can only describe it as a hopeful dread. He eventually got out of the hallway without a scratch on him. He quickly ran to the opposite side of the store and away from the horde of death. Now, he could begin to catch his breath. He looked towards the bathroom hallway and saw the back of all the mannequins. They were all still facing the spots of the bathroom door where he once stood. At this point, we both knew that the mannequins only moved when the lights are turned off. So, as long as the lights stay on, he would be safe. I shouldn't have been thinking that because the very moment the thought entered my head, darkness surrounded the screen once more. This time, it stayed off longer than before. I counted down from 2 minutes and waited until the night vision mode kicked in, but it never got there. I initially thought he should move and find somewhere else to be safe, but then I realized that would have been stupid. The mannequins knew where he was no matter what, and even if they didn't, Anthony would most likely trip and fall over something which would get himself killed even faster. Then suddenly, I just listened for a moment. I heard the static noise of the camera, but I couldn't hear the storm anymore. Before, I heard the vicious thunder and rain as it poured down on the mall's roof, but I couldn't hear anything anymore. That didn't make any sense. If the storm was gone, then how was the power still going out? How were the lights still flickering? And why were the cameras still in perfect working order? Then, the lights came back on. Anthony was back against the wall. Every single mannequin in the store was about a half foot away from Anthony's face. All of their arms and legs were extended out to him, and all of their dead eyes were staring into his soul. When the lights turned off again, every single mannequin would do something ungodly to Anthony. Well, all except one. Anthony wasn't able to move out of his position, but he was able to see out into the store. And what he saw was one lone mannequin who was far separated from the others. I could clearly see this mannequin too. This one was a woman with a great big smile and a red handbag. She was in a corner that was a little difficult to see from the cameras, so I could have easily missed her if I wasn't looking for her. She was standing against the wall on the opposite side of the store as Anthony. She had her arms outstretched towards the wall, and her finger was getting ready to touch something, but I couldn't see what it was at first. I shifted to another camera on the wall and zoomed in. I saw what she was about to touch. Her finger was hovering directly over the light switch. The storm wasn't making the lights flicker on and off. It was the mannequin. He was at their mercy in that moment. He looked back at the woman's face. She wasn't looking at the light switch. She was looking directly at Anthony with her great big smile, just like all the others. His stress and anxiety must have been unimaginable. Nothing could ever compare to being deathly stared down by a bunch of oversized dolls. He tried shouting and telling the mannequin no, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. It's a damn mannequin. Eventually, Anthony gave up on pleading. He looked back at the mannequin's finger and waited. The last thing we saw was the small plastic finger move down ever so slightly. Then, darkness enveloped the screen. Darkness and nothing else. I heard screaming and lots of movements from the screen. I desperately wanted to know what was happening, but also never ever wanted to know what fate he was suffering in that moment. I heard silence after a while, but this time, the night vision mode did turn on, and when it did, I saw the store just as it looked this morning. I still to this day do not know what happened to that man, and at this point, I don't ever want to know. I need you guys to tell me what to do now. After a few more moments of watching the motionless store, I pressed stop. I did my best to destroy all the evidence from that night. I walked out and told them all that the store cut off the power to the camera and they didn't record anything major. I quit right after that. Should I go back and tell them the truth? I do feel bad, leaving that store with those monsters still inside. One small feature bothered me about the end of the surveillance video. When Anthony's body laid lifeless on the floor, and the mannequins returned to their regular store poses, one mannequin was still off. It was the woman. She had turned off the light switch for the final time. She was striking her appropriate pose, but she was staring directly into the camera, directly at me. She knew I was there. She knew I was watching. Now, she's watching me. I work for a large retail chain. Because of my busy school schedule, I'm typically forced to work the evening shift until closing. Not that I mind, it's usually quiet, and sometimes I could get even a little bit of studying done between customers. There are some downsides, though. I don't know what it is about nighttime, but as soon as the sun goes down, the weirdos come out of the woodwork. It seems as though the closer we get to closing, the higher the probability of being harassed by low-life scum. I've had to handle drunks, meth heads, and people with the weirdest shopping lists. I'm talking super suspicious combinations like duct tape, rope, a shovel, gasoline, and a tarp. Like, sometimes I wonder if I'm being filmed for a prank video. But no one ever shows up to tell me it was a joke. Still, I've never feared for my life. At least, not until last night. Not until a guy showed up in a trench coat. It was about 30 minutes until closing. It was late enough that we'd started dimming the lighting, but early enough that it wasn't unusual for new customers to arrive for last minute shopping. Our store is connected to a shopping center, so we've got two entrances. One that leads to the parking lot and one that leads into the mall. Since we stay open an hour later than the mall, we usually lock that entrance once the rest of the shopping center closes, limiting the influx of people. That evening, however, I could tell from my position at the parking lot entrance that the security panel on the mall entrance hadn't been pulled all the way shut. This was extremely abnormal, as we'd sometimes send one of the guys to scour the mall for discarded shopping carts. It just meant that the mall side cashier wasn't going to be able to leave her post. It had been a really quiet night. I hadn't heard a peep for the last 20 minutes when I saw an old man walking very slowly through the women's clothing section. He was headed my way, albeit at a sloth's pace. At first, I didn't think anything of it. As long as he was out by closing, he could take the scenic routes through the bra section for all I cared. It was only when he came into full view that I knew I was in for some annoying late-night weirdo shenanigans. He was wearing a trench coat. Flasher, I groaned, as I noticed his uncovered pale, hairy legs shaking with every step. His sockless feet landed in worn brown penny loafers that, judging by the over-exaggerated steps he kept taking, might as well have weighed a ton. Seriously, he walked as though the floor was made of molasses or his shoes were made of gum. Even among the circus show of freaks I'd seen walk through that door on a daily basis, this man stood out as exceptionally bizarre. I grabbed my walkie and I tried to reach my manager. "Marcy, we've got a code 12, I whispered. "Yes, flashers happen often enough that we have a code for them." I waited for Marcy to reply, but got no answers. She'd probably forgotten her walkie in her office again. I picked up the phone next to my register and dialed the code for the intercoms. "Code 12 on aisle 3. This time, I knew Marcy would hear. On the off chance that she didn't, I hoped my call would attract one of the clerks. Maybe I couldn't stop what was going to happen, but damned if I was going to be the only one having to suffer seeing shriveled old sausage. Unfortunately, no one came. No one even messaged back. I felt myself shrinking where I stood, tensing in anticipation for what was to come. "Hey, I want to see what's under my coat," he asked, as he neared the main aisle separating us. I cringed. He needs to get out of here. He was close enough that I could see every hair on his disgustingly thin legs. They were all flesh and bone, no muscle or fat to speak of. His hands, probably just as bony and disgusting, were stuffed inside the trench coat's pockets. I could see the coat rippling and moving. Lord knows what he was doing under there with those hands. As for his head, it was just as lean as his legs. His face was covered in age spots and his skin was pulled so tight that it looked like someone had shrink wrapped a skull and painted it beige. The strangest thing was that his coat seemed rather large, as though all the body fat was concentrated in his midsection. He didn't just have a beer belly, he had an entire freaking brewery under there. Want to see what's under my coat? He repeated, now in the aisle. I could tell he was going to show me either way. I knew how these things went down. He'd open his coat, show off his sausage, maybe even do a little helicopter trick, and then run off, never to be seen again. The closer you got, the better. Or, rather, the worse view I'd get. I just wanted to get it over with, while he was still far enough that the image wouldn't get burned into my retinas. All right, show me, I grumbled. He froze, looking taken aback. Guess he was used to having people beg him not to do it. His shock wore off, however, and he slipped his hands out of his pockets. With a boyish smile, he grabbed both sides of his coat and swung it open, gleefully presenting himself to me. What I saw wasn't what I expected to see. It was worse, so much worse. I couldn't even tell you if his genitalia was under there because I was too busy staring at the faces. Dozens of heads protruded from his stomach. They twisted and turned, mouths gaped open and letting out silent screams of horror. Near the top of his chest, I recognized Marcy's facial features, sharp nose and sour lips. On his left hip was the mall side cashier. Near the middle, I noticed one of the clerks. Every single person that had been on duty that night, as well as several strangers, were peeking out through his flesh. They had melded together in an unholy abomination. Between the more distinctive heads, I could see mouths, noses, and stray eyes, as though I was discovering a second layer of heads buried beneath a fresh coat. I stood in shocked silence, taking it all in. And then, as quickly as you'd close curtains, the man closed his trench coat. He trotted off in a weird slow-motion run out the door, with a satisfied grin on his face. The only thing he left in his wake were my colleagues' uniforms, and what I can only assume were the clothes of the customers he came across. Well, it's that time of year again. Everyone's talking about their plans for Thanksgiving, whether it be to complain about having to visit their obnoxious relatives, or boasting about all the great food they're going to be stuffing down their gobs in the next few days. Not me, though. I don't have anything against Thanksgiving specifically, mind you. It's the day after that has my stomach in a knot. The day we've come to know as Black Friday. Now. I'm not some anti-consumerist or anything like that. You see, a few years ago, something happened when I was out shopping, and ever since then, I've found myself increasingly anxious by that one little date on a calendar. Shopping hadn't been my intention that day. In fact, it had been the furthest thing from my mind. I just spent all of Thursday, once stayed over at my sister's place to celebrate with her family. After several hours of nonstop crying from her kids and being crowded by in-laws, I was ready to go home and play hermits for the rest of the long weekend. It wasn't until I drove past a large outlet mall and saw a sign for a cheap flat screen TV that I decided to stop and take a look. The sad truth is that my own TV was plenty big enough already. I didn't need a new one, I just wanted one because of how cheap it was. Drawn in by the sale, I parked in the busy lots and wandered through the main doors. As soon as I passed through the threshold, I was dazzled by the brightness of the interior. It was like leaving a dark movie theater in the middle of a winter day, with a field of snow reflecting all the sun rays right onto my face. It was bad enough that I had to squint for a minute for my eyes to adjust to the brightness. I could hear a simple elevator light tune playing the same short chorus over and over again, sounding somehow louder with each rotation. As my eyes began to focus, however, the music faded to the background like a cockroach escaping to a dark corner. And so I looked around. I was in a mall. No surprise there. I was surrounded by pristine white walls, a flawless marble floor, and the lemony odor in the air all reminded me of a newly sterilized operating room. Despite all the cars in the parking lot, the mall was strangely empty, but I could hear the chatter of a crowd in the distance. There were bright neon lights flooding the empty hallway ahead of me, ushering me forward like a landing strip. I started to walk, but as I looked at the storefronts, I noticed most of the shops were still closed. That was odd. It was the middle of the afternoon on Black Friday. If there was ever a time for a store to be open, it was now. Curious, though, I approached the closest door and pressed my hand against its windows, peering into the dark interior. As far as I could tell, it was devoid of both people and merchandise. All I could see were half melted mannequins standing single file between a row of empty shelves. Judging by the amount of dust I could see, this store had been closed for quite some time. All of the stores were as empty as this one, so I figured this wing of the mall must have been under construction or something. I headed towards the sound of a crowd. The mall's appearance seemed to deteriorate the closer I got to the sound of a crowd, bringing credence to my theory that I'd entered through a part of the mall in the process of being renovated. They were probably finishing up work on the stores before reopening them. Where the marble floor had once been flawlessly smooth, it was now littered with scuff marks, dents, and pieces of chewing gum. The walls had yellowed and cracks had begun to form along their surface. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of rubbish: magazines, plastic shopping bags, wrappers, clothing, cardboard cutouts of cereal mascots, and even what appeared to be a brand new laptop. Among the garbage, I saw a wallet on the floor. Now, I'm not one of those sleazy jerks, so when I picked up the wallet, my every intention wasn't to keep it for myself. I genuinely had planned on returning it to its owner. However, as I fingered through it, I couldn't find a single piece of ID. Every available slot was filled with a different platinum credit card. No name marked on the fronts, no signature on the back. I checked the centerfold and found a whopping $300 in cash. I had two options: bringing it to the lost and found office, or abide by the tried and true finders keepers rule. I still hadn't decided. Even as I stuffed the wallet into my back pocket and gave it a firm slap, let's face it, if I did hand it over to the lost and found, they'd probably take the money themselves, right? I'd figured I'd hang on to it for now and hopefully come across its owner looking for it. I continued down the empty hallway of blackened storefronts until I came upon Pluto's Depot, a large electronics store with a banner that read, "Black Friday sale. Everything must go." Hundreds of shoppers were running through the aisles, grabbing everything they could get their greedy little hands on. They were screaming and clawing at one another, shamelessly stealing items from each other's shopping carts. It was like any other Black Friday on steroids, really. I stood outside Pluto's Depot wondering if I should turn back. Whatever deals this store had probably weren't worth it, right? I could feel the bulge of the strangers' wallets in my pants. Who's to say the owner isn't inside? I certainly wasn't drawn in by this 50 to 70% off posters clumsily plastered all over the store's bumpy walls, and I most definitely wasn't attracted to all the phenomenally low-priced gizmos and gadgets on the shelves. I definitely didn't have the money burning in my pocket, begging to be spent. No, not at all. I was being selfless, really. That's what I told myself, at least. As I stepped through the door, I was assaulted with the familiar scent of plastic and upholstery. The famed new car smell is what came to mind. I squeezed through a group of frantic shoppers to get to the shopping cart dock. Unfortunately, it was empty. If I found that flat screen TV I saw advertised outside the mall, I was going to have to carry it in my arms, and my arms were quickly filling up already. There were so many cool things to buy, and so few things left on the shelves. By the time I made it to the back, every single TV had been taken. All that was left in that section of the store was the latest smartphone. I don't remember the make and model, but I remember thinking, isn't this supposed to come out next month? So I grabbed it. I doubled back and decided to pursue the store more thoroughly, taking a few more objects as I went along. But as I walked through the aisles, I kept hearing the faintest groans coming from the posters on the walls. Groans that I ignored. I figured it was my imagination. Maybe I was hearing something from the other aisle. Hell if I know. With nothing else to buy, I parked myself at the back of the checkout line. It stretched all the way down the aisle and around a corner. I had an armful of stuff weighing me down, but it was worth it for the discount. I had enough gadgets to cover everyone's Christmas gifts, as well as a few more things for myself. A mini drone, a fancy remote-controlled car, my new phone, accessories, and a laptop case. That kind of stuff. Even with everything carefully balanced between my forearms and chest, I still fought to open the phone so I can admire it. I was about to buy it, and after all, who cared if I opened the box before I paid, right? It was great. Sleek, skinny, light. I couldn't wait to charge it and start playing with it. I shuffled around impatiently and looked at the line. We hadn't moved, I thought to myself. My neck was stiff, my feet were throbbing, and my back was aching. The objects in my arms felt as though they were getting heavier and heavier by the minute. The line was taking forever, and no one seemed to be leaving the store, no matter how much time has passed. I was tempted to leave, but I couldn't give up. I wanted the deals, I wanted that phone, and I wanted the gizmos and trinkets. I must have stood there for another 10 minutes without moving before I got frustrated and glanced towards the people ahead of me. Why hadn't we moved? Had the cashier fallen asleep? I felt my stomach stop as my eyes scanned the line. The other customers' shoes had melted onto the floor, and their hands had merged with their shopping carts. The closer they got to the register, the less the shoppers looked human. Their shapes became less and less distinct, blending into the objects they were purchasing and the walls they were leaning against. I let out a scream and I tried to take a step back, but my feet were stuck. I looked down only to find my shoes had melted onto the floor as well. Oh God, it was happening to me. In shock, I dropped the boxes I was holding, sending them falling onto the floor. It felt as though an immense weight had been lifted from my shoulders in the most literal sense. Like that carnival ride that looks like a flying saucer, pinning you against the wall. I hadn't realized how much pressure my body had been under until the pressure was gone. But it wasn't completely gone. My hand was impossibly heavy. It was the phone. I was still holding the phone. It was planted firmly in the palm of my hand. I could see its slick black casing melting into my flesh. My hand burned. Desperately, I clawed at the phone, trying to pry it from my skin, but it wouldn't budge. I remember flapping my arm up and down erratically as though I'd just caught a spider crawling up my hand. It wouldn't let go. The phone wouldn't let go of me. And then, by pure chance, my hand caught the wall, and the phone shattered into bits and pieces, ripping one of the 70% off posters from the porous surface. I was too busy nursing my hand to notice the wall at first. It was only then, when I heard a groan, that I looked up to find a tormented face looking back at me. He, or she, or it, had completely merged with the wall. Was the entire store like this? I remember sobbing as I plucked broken pieces of phone from my palm, while never taking my eyes off the person in the wall. My hand throbbed with pain, but with each chunk I pulled out, it hurt just a little bit less. Thankfully, when the last piece of plastic dropped to the floor, I was able to move my feet again. I ran out of Pluto's depot without looking back or trying to help anyone inside. I ran through the hallway of cracked walls, stopping only long enough to realize they were eyes staring back at me within those cracks. I staggered out of the mall and into the empty parking lot. My car was the only one there, off in the distance. I turned around and instead of a large outlet mall I'd walked in earlier, I found one of the many crumbling abandoned buildings we see nowadays. That's why I like to stay at home at this time of year. Because honestly, that fake mall is still out there somewhere, and I have no way of knowing which doors will lead me to it. I'm afraid it'll lure me back in, and I won't have the willpower to resist next time. Do any of you work the night shift? I don't mean 5 to 12, I mean 12 to 7 a.m. Well, I work night security at a strip mall. The area I live in is pretty nice, but at night it feels like a different city. I'll admit I grew up a little sheltered, not prepared for a truly dangerous situation, but I've grown good common sense over the years. I got a security job at the local strip mall 6 months ago. It's out in Waterloo, New York. It's a pretty damn big city. So after closing, there are 7 security guards set up all over the property. I'd say we are decently armed. We have nightsticks, tasers, and pepper spray. So with all that, I never thought I'd be in any danger working there. Henry, one of the security guards I work with, always mentioned that I'll only have to really worry about dope dealers and stupid teens. He said that on my 6th day working there. Hell, in 6 months, we've only had 8 incidents. The worst was a coke dealer pulling a knife on Jen, and it did take 3 of us to take him down. But, anyways, about 2 weeks ago, the spring rush was in full swing. Most of our nights were spent reminding shoppers that the stores were closed. All 7 of us are pretty close, so when Wesley's mother died, it hit us pretty hard, and that happened last Sunday. But the next few days before the funeral, we were down to 3 security guards: Henry, Jen, and I. The rest were with Wesley at his parents' house helping out. It felt really weird not being able to run 4 stores down to meet up with another guard. I was tasked with guarding the whole section on the same side as the food court. It was lonely, but I had one thing to keep me company: the mall's music. Now, I don't exactly know why, but ever since I've worked here, we were told to leave on the music 24/7. Now, I used to hate radio music, but I've grown to really like it. They're just really fun, you know? So when I was forced to work alone, I leaned on the music more than ever. Silence is a bad sign at my work. And this was very true the night that it happened. It was 11:30 p.m. Jen was on the other side of the complex. Henry was checking the perimeter, and I was walking around the Nike store. I was badly humming along to the mall's music as I tried on shoes. Right before the song ended, I heard it. Well, I heard nothing. No music, nothing at all. Before, I thought the worst. I thought that something had gone wrong with the tech system. Henry radioed me asking if everything was all right. Yeah, I think something might have happened to the PA system. I'll radio back if anything. The rain was hitting hard as I ran to the food court. The PA tech system is inside an office within that food court. As soon as I entered the food court, I knew something was off. I have sat in that same room hundreds of times in 6 months, so I knew when the soda machine was in the wrong spot. Hello? I made sure my voice didn't crack. After a good 15 minutes of silence, I ran to the office. The door was wide open. It had been kicked in. I pulled out my taser as I entered the office. The whole PA system was completely smashed, but nothing else was touched. The silence was getting to me. Henry, Jen, I need you guys here now. Someone broke into the food court. I was panicking. I sat in the computer chair back against the office wall until they both got there 5 minutes later. We walked around my section, but I couldn't find a thing. Once we got back to the food court, Jen slapped her head.
Dom, please tell me you checked the security footage.
Damn. I was too scared earlier that I completely forgot the security office was right across from the tech office. I shook my head. All three of us marched into the security office and rewinded the food court footage. At about 11:28 p.m., the doors to the food court opened. A man wearing a blue suit shuffled in. I thought he was trying to be silent, but the guy kept moving like that. The man was bald. His skin had a really odd gray hue, but he kept his face towards the ground. The man moved towards the back, but tripped over one of the tables, falling onto the soda machine. That's when we got a good look at their face. The man was wearing a mask, a giant, almost comical nose, eyes that were pure black holes, and his mouth filled with small spears for teeth. It was almost as if he knew that his mask got caught. He threw his left hand in front of it. His hand was huge, like baseball gloves. He also had really long nails. They looked like they were filed to the point. But anyways, the man shuffled over to the back office, smashed his shoulder against the door until it broke. He disappeared into the office. Once he left, it was 11:32 p.m., only 20 seconds before I entered the food court. He ran out to the back door. I was excited. We should have been able to find this guy quickly, but I remembered that it was already 11:45. He had enough time to get to the other side of the complex if he wanted to.
All right, I checked the other cameras. He must have known where to go because I haven't gotten anything. Let's search the whole complex together. No splitting up.
Jen ordered. A few minutes later, all three of us were checking the stores on my side. We got to the Adidas stores when we all heard it. The music started up again. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest and Jen screamed. Henry put his hands on our shoulders and said, "All right, shut up. I need you two to stay right here. I'll radio back as soon as I get to the office." "Should we call the cops?" I asked. "It's one guy. I'll call them as soon as we catch him," he responded before he ran off. While we waited for Henry to radio in, Jen and I checked the rest of the Adidas store.
Dom, get over here.
Jen screamed as I was looking behind the counter. She brought me back to the dressing room. I had no idea what was going on until she turned my head towards the mirror at the end of the hallway. "Banished to hell, clawed my way back to earth," was painted in gold on the mirror. "Hey, Henry, we need you back here. Some weird stuff is going on." I radioed to Henry. Yeah, I know. The PA system is still smashed. There is no way the music should be playing right now." As soon as Henry said that, we all heard a loud smash coming from the island stores. In the middle of the complex and the huge parking lot, we have a Zoomies and a H&M setup. Henry told us to head over there with our tasers at the ready. He still needed to check the bathrooms. On our way, I thought I saw something move behind one of the food trucks we have sitting there in the parking lot. I tried to get Jen to wait for me, but she told me she'd meet me at Zoomies. I could hear a strange clicking noise coming from the truck, which got louder as I approached. As soon as I opened the back doors, I could have sworn I saw a figure in the front seat, but it vanished as I got into the truck. "Hey, nobody's in the food truck. I'll be at Zoomies in a few minutes," I radioed to the others. But before I left the truck, I saw something shiny under the radio. The truck seemed to shift as I knelt down. I put my hand in the dark compartment and felt something. I gripped it and pulled it out. It was a finger with a ring on it. It was caked in dried blood. I swallowed vomit as I turned around, still staring at the finger.
"I can make you peer."
I snapped my head back up. The man was standing in front of me. I dropped the finger, reached for my taser, but the man quickly got to me. His meaty hands wrapped around my throat.
"God can't help you escape hell, but I can show you."
He whispered. It sounded like he had a voice changer in his mask. Now here's where the crazy stuff happens. Now, I know I'm going to get skeptics, but please believe me. Behind the masked man was this horrible face. It looked like someone morphed a horse's head with a human's. But in the middle of the forehead was this weird mark branded into its skin. It was a triangle with an X in the middle. My radio squawked. I heard Henry's voice saying, "Dom, are you?" But before he finished, the masked man grabbed the back of my head. The last thing I saw was my face heading towards the food truck's counter. I was out, but I didn't black out. I was dreaming. I dreamt I was strapped down to a chair. I was in what looked like a freezer, but it wasn't cold. In fact, I was still wearing my security uniform. After a few seconds of screaming for help, the freezer door opened. Out of the pitch black, the horseman walked in. He was wearing a yellow radioactive suit, but his face was completely uncovered. He was holding a rod in his hand, and that triangle brand on the end of it,
I can make you peer.
the thing would say. It had a screeching, nails on the chalkboard kind of voice. The thing rolled up my sleeves and smashed the brand into my arm. I would feel searing pain, but the dream would quickly loop back to the beginning of the dream as soon as I felt it. It looped a good 6 times before I woke up. Once I actually woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Henry and my parents sat next to me. He already knew that I had questions, so Henry answered them before I even asked. "It's Saturday night, buddy. Jen told me that she hadn't seen you since you went to the food truck, so I ran over there. You're lucky because I caught that psycho holding you over his shoulders, running behind the complex. I got pretty close, but he threw you at me before I was able to taser him. He didn't just toss you, though, he chucked you. I saw him claw at his face, and his mask fell off. I was too busy making sure you were okay before I could catch the guy. I got a good look at the mask, though. It must have been glued to his face. It even had a bald cap. But guess what was inside? I sat up in the hospital bed. A voice changer? Henry looked surprised. Yeah, actually. My father interrupted the conversation, telling me that the police wanted to talk to me. When I talked to the police, they said that they would try to find the guy. His hands would make it easy. I was released from the hospital that Sunday afternoon, just in time for Wesley's mom's funeral. I'm taking some time off from work. The mall is giving me a month off with $150 every Saturday. They even told me that they'd pay me $20 an hour once I get back. I was getting paid $14 at the time. But since then, life has been relatively normal. I did have the dream again Monday night, but I felt weird telling anyone. Everything was sort of normal. But it got bad again Tuesday morning. I was at a gas station buying some snacks when a man in a large black pea coat came out of the bathroom. He came over to me in the aisle and started a conversation. "What's your favorite kind of beef jerky?" The man said. He had an average face, except his jaw was razor sharp, and his hair was pretty long, but he looked normal. Usually the Jack Link's teriyaki bites, but they're really expensive," I said, holding up the bag. The man slowly walked towards me and nodded at another off-brand teriyaki jerky bag. "Try those. They're pretty damn delicious." "All right, I will. Are you from the South? Your accent is pretty strong." The man looked at me inquisitively. "Yes, actually, Louisiana to be exact. I'm just here to visit a friend of mine. I'm leaving today, though. I got some friends out west that I want to visit." "Oh, do you travel a lot?" A grin grew on his face. "Sort of." I was about to ask what he meant, but he interrupted. "It's been nice talking to you, but I gotta head out. I work on a tight schedule." The man turned around and walked towards the exit before I even said goodbye. But right before he left the store, I looked down at the boots he was wearing. A white triangle with an X inside was painted on the back of each boot. My heart started pumping out of my chest as I sprinted towards the bathroom. 10 sharp nails were scattered all over the sink. They had been clipped I ran back outside just in time to see the man pull away in an all-white Matador with no license plates. I immediately called 911, told them the situation, and gave them the description of the car. That was around about 11 Tuesday morning. I've heard that the news stations are giving descriptions of the man in the car, but nothing has came up since then. I truly wish that I could help whomever he is going to meet next, but I feel this selfish relief that the man is away from me now. I just hope he took his abomination with him.